Hi there, if the RS4 Mini is your first ever gimbal, you might be feeling a bit overwhelmed or a bit confused about all of the jargon when it comes to gimbals, but don't worry, this video is going to assume that you've got no previous gimbal knowledge. We're going to be breaking things down, talking about the moving parts so you can really get the most out of your investment. And ultimately, you're buying a gimbal because you want to get footage that's as smooth as melted butter in a non-stick pan listening to Barry White. I've already got a super detailed video on how to install a camera, balance the gimbal and connect the gimbal to the camera, so I'm not going to be repeating that in this video, but I will include a link to that video in the description. Let's start off by looking at the three different axes that make up 3-axis stabilization on a gimbal. Now, ordinarily on this RS4 Mini, when you turn it on, it's going to automatically unlock the axes. You can see at the minute that they're all locked, so none of them are moving around. I'm not going to power on the gimbal. I'm going to manually unlock these axes just so I can demonstrate what's going to be happening. Normally when the gimbal's powered on, you're not going to want to try and move these things around because you could damage the gimbal. The first axis is called the pan axis, and this is the thing that moves the gimbal left and right. You can see it's attached to the main handle of the gimbal body. So anytime you see pan axis or pan motor, we're referring to this movement here. The next axis is the roll axis, and this is the thing at the back here that rolls the camera and effectively controls the horizon when you're holding the gimbal upright. The third axis is the tilt axis, and this is the thing that moves the camera up when you want to look up and moves the camera down when you want to move down. It's important to know the names of these three different axes because when you come to modify settings, you're going to need to know what you're actually modifying. The next most important thing, and the thing that can be confusing at first, is to understand the different gimbal follow modes. So I'm going to hold in the power button and we'll get this thing powered on. On the side of this gimbal, you've got this switch, and this allows you to switch between the three main follow modes. You can see here we've got PTF, PF and FPV modes. We're going to look at each of these three in turn. When the gimbal screen is locked, it tells us what mode we're in, and you can see we're in PTF mode. If I go and modify the switch, you can change to FPV, PF and back to PTF. So you always know what follow mode you're in. Let's start off by looking at pan follow mode, which is what PF stands for. In pan follow mode, the gimbal is going to respond to movements left and right, but you can see if I switch over to the camera's view, as I'm moving the gimbal left and right, the horizon is staying level. If I tilt the gimbal this way and this way, or this way and this way, the camera is always staying upright and level. So the pan follow mode is ideal for left to right or right to left movements where you want to keep the horizon level. You can use it when you're orbiting or circling around a subject, or you want to follow a moving subject in the frame. So essentially the pan axis can move around, but the tilt and the roll axis maintain the position of the camera. All right, let's switch over to PTF mode, or pan tilt follow mode. So in this mode, both the pan axis can move around, but also the tilt axis can move around. So whereas before in pan follow mode, the camera didn't tilt up and down, that horizon always stayed in the same place. As I move the gimbal or tilt the gimbal forward, the camera points forward to look down, and if I tilt the gimbal up, the camera tilts upward to look up. So in this mode, the pan axis motor can move around and the tilt axis motor can move up and down, but the roll axis motor is being used to stabilize the footage so we don't end up tilting our horizons. You can use pan tilt follow mode where you want to look up and down and left and right, and you want to be able to have those diagonal movements. So for example, you might want to use this mode if you're following a person and then you want to tilt up to show their face, or you can use this mode to do reveal shots. For example, say I wanted to reveal this studio, I could start off tilted down like this and then move forward and tilt the gimbal up to reveal the rest of the studio. Let's switch the gimbal over to the third main follow mode, which is FPV mode, or first person view mode. In this mode, all 3 axes will respond to the movement of the gimbal. Now let me show you what this looks like. Before we had tilting and we had panning, but this time if I tilt the gimbal to the side, we can get the camera to effectively make the horizon no longer level. So you can use these kinds of shots for really dynamic, strange first-person views where you can tilt, bring the camera around, and then level out the camera. You probably won't use FPV mode as much as you'll use pan follow and pan tilt follow modes, but you can use it to get highly dynamic, highly creative, highly energetic shots when you need them. I'm going to switch back to pan tilt follow mode, and here's a quick tip for you. You can double click the joystick to recenter the gimbal. And I want to show you a 4th mode, and that's locked mode. If you press the front joystick and hold it in, the gimbal is going to enter what's called locked mode. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tilt the handle to the left and tilt the handle to the right. You can see the camera is staying dead straight forward. I'm going to tilt it down and tilt it up. The camera's still staying forwards. If I move my body this way, the camera's still pointing that way. And one use for this is if you want to walk sideways, but keep the camera pointing that way, you can keep your finger held on the trigger. And it doesn't matter which way I move my body, the camera is always going to be looking at that part of the studio. So you might want to use lock mode for situations where you want the most stable, steady shot. Maybe you're trying to film a static shot of a building or an object like a car or something, and you just want the camera to be locked onto that subject. You can also create custom follow modes. To do this, you need to change the switch on the side to FPV mode and then tap on the bottom left where it says FPV. You can also select the specialist 3D roll function, but if you slide across, you can come over to custom and then tap on the top right little pencil icon to customize which of the axes will actually be locked and which ones will follow the gimbal movement. If I turn off all of them, then the gimbal is not going to follow any movements. And you can see here, this is kind of a similar thing to locked on mode. That's because none of the axes of the gimbal are following the gimbal movements. So if you wanted to, you could just turn on tilt follow mode. So basically this mode, if I just center the gimbal, allows you, or this custom mode I should say, allows you to tilt up and down, but it's always going to be trying to face the camera the same way to the front. So using these custom modes gives you a lot of extra flexibility when you're trying to set up the shot that you want. Just going to switch this back to pan tilt follow mode. So now we understand the follow modes, the next important thing to understand is that we can customize the reactivity of the gimbal when we're in these modes. And you can do this to really fine-tune how the gimbal responds to the situation you're filming. Let me show you how to do this in the settings. If your gimbal screen is locked, swipe up to unlock it and then tap on the bottom right to access the follow speed and smoothness settings. So you can choose between slow, medium, fast, and also custom. And there's also 2 separate modes. You've got smooth mode and responsive mode. Smooth mode allows you to get that really nice butter and Barry White effect, if that's even a thing. So you're going to have those really nice cinematic movements, but if you're following something that's moving a bit more fast and you want the gimbal to respond more quickly to your movements, then you can choose responsive mode. But in these 2 modes, you've also got the slow, medium, and fast settings. If you want to, you can even customize this further by changing to custom and tapping at the top right, and then choosing a custom follow speed. I'm going to set this to 100, and you can see as I move the gimbal around now, it's reacting really quickly to my movements. And if we amp this up even more by changing over to responsive mode, we're already on 100. Now the gimbal, as you can see, is moving really fast to my gimbal movements, even at the expense of a little bit of smoothness. But that's what you want if your most important thing is to keep the thing you're filming in frame and it's moving fast. I'm just going to change this back to medium and smooth, which is a good general purpose mode to start with. All right, let's move on now to the physical controls on the RS4 Mini gimbal. We've already seen the power button and the follow mode selector switch, so I won't be going into those again. You've got this red button. This is the camera control button. You can half press this to initiate autofocus on the camera. You can press it all the way in to start recording video, and you can press it all the way in again to stop recording video. And if you hold this button in, you can ask the camera to take a photo. Next up, we've got this M button, and by default, if you press this once, it's going to tell the camera to take a photo, but you can modify this so it activates custom function 1 on your camera if you want that. And you can press this button in and hold it if you want to access sport mode. And in sport mode, the follow speed of the gimbal will increase if you need to track fast moving subjects. The next control is this joystick, and you can change what this joystick does by switching this switch here. When this switch is at the bottom, this is going to allow you to move the gimbal around using the joystick. You control the tilt and the pan axes. And if you switch this switch up to the top, you can now use the up and down functions on the joystick to zoom in and out on your camera if you've got your camera set up to perform that action. All right, next up, we've got the trigger at the front. We already talked about lock mode, so if you hold this trigger button in, the gimbal will enter lock mode, and when you release it, lock mode will disable. If you want to recenter the gimbal, double press the trigger, then it will recenter and point forwards. And if you've not got selfie mode disabled, which I have, if you did a triple press, the gimbal is going to turn around and look backwards if you're using it in a selfie situation. I like to have this turned off because I don't want to accidentally initiate selfie mode in the middle of a video recording. We've also got this front dial here, and you can customize what this front dial does. I've got an entire video on how to change the settings in this gimbal, so I'm not going to go into that here. At the minute, I've just got it set up to control the pan axis, but you can set it to do things like focus or change camera settings. I'll put a link to that settings video in this description. All right, let's talk next about the different operation modes or handling modes of this gimbal. The first and most common one you see is this mode where you're holding the gimbal, and at the minute I've got the tripod extension handle fitted to this gimbal, and I highly recommend that you have this fitted. Not only does it make it really easy to put the gimbal down without it falling over, but it gives you a lot bigger area to hold this gimbal. So this first mode is called upright mode, or you might have heard it called lollipop mode. And this is a basic general purpose handling mode. So you could use this if you're filming, walking, or running shots of a subject. The next operation mode is underslung mode, and this is where you're going to have the handle pointing upright and you're holding the gimbal so the camera is underslung. Now there's a couple of things to be careful of here. You want to be really careful that this axis doesn't hit the lens of the camera. You can see on this 20mm lens, it's pretty close. And you also want to make sure, even if it's not going to hit the lens, that you don't accidentally get the gimbal in the shot. And this mode is great if you want to do low to the ground movements. And that can really emphasize a sense of speed if you're tracking things low to the ground, because the ground's rushing past the lens really quickly. The next mode is flashlight mode, and this is simply where you hold the gimbal pointing straight out. And again, this is where this extra handle really comes in handy, no pun intended, because it gives you a lot more stability and it gives you 2 points to hold this gimbal. And you can use this mode if you're in really tight spaces, say you're following someone down a tunnel or something like that. It also means you can get closer to subjects if you want to pass by them. So if I'm just passing by this table, I can get a lot closer to this table than I could in normal upright mode. The next operating mode is briefcase mode, and for this you're going to need the handle that fits on the RS4 Mini. Once you've fitted the handle, you can adjust the orientation of this handle, and then you can use it in this briefcase mode, which makes handling it a lot more comfortable. And this makes shooting low down footage a lot more comfortable because, as you can see here, just holding the briefcase handle like I would hold a briefcase, if anyone even used briefcases these days, it's a lot more intuitive. And if you want to, you can still hold the handle to create an even more secure hold and also distribute some of the weight from one hand onto two hands. When using the briefcase handle, just make sure that you don't adjust this in such a way as it's going to hit the roll motor. What you're going to want to do is meet me in this next video to learn even more tips and tricks to get the most out of your investment in this gimbal. I'm Jason Roberts. Please subscribe. Hopefully I'll see you in that next video, and bye bye.